The wing part suspected of belonging to that missing Malaysian Airlines jet is now in a lab for analysis. A team of international investigators hoping something on that piece of metal may finally reveal what happened to Flight 370.
This is the revelation everyone has waited for. A top MH370 expert, after decades of research, is finally speaking out about the plane's secret location. For years, families, investigators, and the world have been searching in vain. Now, his findings could rewrite history. Every hint, every calculation, every clue leads to a place no one imagined. Could the truth about MH370 finally be revealed? Why did it take so long for someone to find it? Join us as we dive into the shocking discovery and uncover answers at last. The facts beneath the mystery. The flight took place on March 8, 2014. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 was a Boeing 777 traveling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. It departed just after midnight at 12:41 in the morning. On board were 239 people, including business travelers, tourists, and families beginning ordinary journeys. At the start, nothing about the flight stood out. The aircraft climbed smoothly, the systems worked as expected, and communication with air traffic control followed routine procedures. Everything appeared normal. For roughly the first 30 minutes, there were no warning signs. The pilots spoke calmly with controllers, and the plane followed its planned route. Then came the final contact from the cockpit. At 1:19 in the morning, Malaysian Air Traffic Control instructed the crew to make contact with Vietnam as the plane entered new airspace. The response from the pilot was steady and polite, signaling the end of communication with Malaysia. 2 minutes later, at 1:21, something important happened. The plane's transponder stopped transmitting. The transponder is a critical device. It sends information about the aircraft's identity, altitude, and speed to civilian radar systems. When it went dark, MH370 effectively vanished from the screens used by air traffic controllers. To observers, it appeared as if the plane had suddenly disappeared. However, that was not the full picture. Malaysia's military radar continued to detect an aircraft. Military radar works differently from civilian systems. Instead of relying on a transponder signal, it sends out radio waves and captures reflections from objects in the sky. An unidentified return appeared on these radar screens, and investigators later concluded that it was almost certainly MH370. What made this discovery alarming was the aircraft's behavior. It was no longer flying along its planned route. The plane made a sharp turn to the left. This was not a gentle drift caused by weather or a system failure. It was a controlled maneuver. Instead of continuing northeast toward Beijing, the aircraft turned west, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula. It passed close to familiar territory before continuing toward the Andaman Sea. Military radar tracked this movement for about an hour. At 2:22 in the morning, the radar contact disappeared northwest of Penang Island. After that moment, no radar system detected the aircraft again. There were still no distress signals, no emergency codes, and no explanation from the crew. Yet the plane was not completely silent. Even though it was no longer communicating with air traffic control, another system on board was still active. The aircraft's satellite communication system, known as the Satellite Data Unit, reconnected with an Inmarsat satellite positioned over the Indian Ocean. This system was not designed to track aircraft. It simply exchanged brief maintenance signals to confirm that the system was powered. These signals became extremely important. Over the next 6 hours, the plane sent 7 of these automatic handshakes. Each one was a simple confirmation that the aircraft was still operating. With no radar data, no radio contact, and no black boxes, these signals became the main source of information about the plane's movement after it left military radar coverage. Engineers studied 2 pieces of data from the satellite exchanges. The first was the burst timing offset, which measured the time delay of the signal as it traveled between the plane and the satellite. The second was the burst frequency offset, which showed a slight change in frequency caused by motion. By combining these measurements, investigators calculated large arcs showing where the plane could have been at each handshake. Two general paths emerged. One arc pointed north across parts of Asia. The other stretched far south into the Indian Ocean. The northern option was dismissed quickly. That region is heavily monitored by radar systems operated by several countries. A large commercial jet could not pass through unnoticed. This left the southern path as the most likely route. The final satellite handshake occurred at 8:19 in the morning. This created what became known as the seventh arc. Based on fuel calculations, investigators concluded that this moment likely marked the time when the aircraft ran out of fuel and descended somewhere along that arc in the remote Indian Ocean. What followed was one of the largest and most expensive searches in aviation history. Aircraft, ships, and later deep-sea vehicles examined an area of about 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, an area roughly the size of Pennsylvania. The search lasted for years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars. Advanced sonar equipment scanned the seabed in detail. The results were deeply frustrating. No main wreckage was found. Over time, a small number of debris pieces washed ashore in different locations. A wing flap was discovered on Reunion Island. Interior components appeared in Mozambique. Additional fragments were found in Madagascar. While these items were linked to the aircraft, they did not provide clear answers. The cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder were never recovered. As the search ended without a confirmed crash site, doubts began to grow. The satellite analysis was considered advanced and carefully done, yet it pointed to an empty stretch of ocean. This gap between strong calculations and missing physical evidence left many people uneasy. With no final proof and no complete explanation, theories began to spread. Some were unrealistic, while others raised serious questions. When the simple answer no longer fits, when all the noise is removed, the official explanation for the disappearance of MH370 sounds very straightforward. In fact, it may sound too straightforward. In the years after the aircraft vanished, investigators, media organizations, and even some aviation specialists focused on a single idea and treated it as the main answer. According to this explanation, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a 53-year-old pilot with more than 18,000 hours of flight experience, deliberately took control of the aircraft. This version says he disabled communication systems, turned the plane sharply back across Malaysia, reduced cabin pressure so everyone else on board became unconscious, and then continued flying south for almost 7 hours. When the fuel was gone, the Boeing 777 was believed to have entered the southern Indian Ocean. This account painted a dark picture of a trusted professional causing the deaths of 239 people. On the surface, it seemed clear and complete. However, when the evidence is examined carefully, this explanation breaks down in several major ways. The first major issue lies in the satellite data, which formed the foundation of the official theory. MH370 made a series of automated connections, often called handshakes, with an Inmarsat satellite. These signals were used to estimate where the plane traveled after it disappeared from radar. The final data point, recorded around 8:19 in the morning, raised serious concerns. The burst frequency offset, known as BFO, did not suggest a smooth and gentle descent, as would be expected if the aircraft were gliding without engines toward a controlled water landing. Instead, the numbers pointed to a rapid loss of altitude and a sudden downward movement. This pattern is closer to a steep drop than a calm glide. A review by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau in 2016 indicated that the aircraft may have been descending at speeds reaching 15,000 feet per minute. Such a rate does not match a planned or stable landing attempt. It indicates a violent and uncontrolled fall, which weakens the idea of a deliberate, careful end to the flight. The physical evidence found years later creates even more problems for the official explanation. The first confirmed piece of the aircraft, a flaperon, was discovered in July of 2015 on Reunion Island, near the coast of Africa.
ABC's Alex Marquardt reports in from Reunion Island, where they found that mystery part.
Over time, roughly 36 additional fragments were found along shorelines in places such as Madagascar, Mozambique, Tanzania, Mauritius, and South Africa. Some of these pieces were fully confirmed as belonging to MH370, while others were considered very likely matches. The condition of these fragments is important. The flaperon showed damage that did not match what experts would expect from a gentle water landing. Its trailing edge was heavily damaged in a way consistent with intense vibration at high speed, a phenomenon known as flutter damage. This type of destruction occurs when a control surface shakes violently in fast-moving air. Further examination revealed that the aircraft's flaps were retracted. This detail matters because retracted flaps indicate a cruising configuration, not one prepared for landing. Other debris supported this pattern. A wing flap section found in Tanzania showed signs of breaking due to overload. This type of fracture suggests a high-energy impact rather than a slow and controlled descent. If the aircraft had been intentionally ditched in the ocean, investigators would expect to see extended flaps, larger and more intact sections of the plane, and possibly floating parts of the fuselage. Instead, the recovered fragments point to severe force and destruction. The third major weakness in the official explanation involves the search operation itself. Governments spent hundreds of millions of dollars scanning the Indian Ocean. More than 120,000 square kilometers of seabed were mapped using ships, sonar equipment, and underwater vehicles. Despite the scale of this effort, nothing definitive was found. The entire search was based on a series of assumptions. Investigators assumed the satellite data described a precise flight path. They assumed the aircraft's fuel consumption followed exact model predictions. They assumed the autopilot kept the plane flying straight until fuel exhaustion. Most importantly, they treated the seventh arc, a narrow line derived from satellite data, as a fixed and unquestionable endpoint. Assumptions can be risky, especially when they guide decisions of this magnitude. Year after year passed, with teams scanning deep trenches and rugged underwater terrain, yet no main wreckage appeared. This raised a troubling possibility. The search area itself may have been wrong. The strong belief in one explanation led investigators to interpret every piece of evidence in a way that supported it. This is a classic example of confirmation bias. The pilot-focused explanation was simple and easy to present, but the actual data was complex and often conflicting. By the time the official search was halted in early 2017, frustration had spread widely. Families of the passengers and crew were left without closure. Experts openly admitted that the case remained deeply puzzling. The public was left with an explanation that felt incomplete and unsatisfying. If the commonly accepted theory about Captain Zahari did not fully explain the evidence, then other questions had to be considered. Perhaps the satellite data had been interpreted incorrectly. Perhaps the wreckage told a different story about how the aircraft met the ocean. Or perhaps there was another method involving overlooked technology that could track the flight more accurately than the tools used during the official search. How amateur radio data offered a new lead on MH370. 2 years after many people had stopped believing that MH370 would ever be found, a surprising line of thinking emerged from a quiet place. A man in his 70s sat alone in his study, turning over an idea that sounded unusual and even unlikely at first. He wondered whether a missing airplane could be tracked without satellites, without radar, and without advanced military systems. Instead, he asked whether it might be possible to follow the plane's path using the work of amateur radio hobbyists experimenting in their own garages. This question was raised by Richard Godfrey, a retired British aerospace engineer.
We have oceanography, drift analysis, we have the performance data from Boeing.
About 2 years after the disappearance of the aircraft, he was still unsettled by the lack of answers. While governments had already spent millions of dollars on large-scale searches that revealed nothing but empty ocean, Godfrey felt that something was missing. His entire career had been spent solving complex engineering problems, and this mystery stood out as the most challenging one he had ever encountered. He believed there had to be another way to look at the problem, one that others had overlooked. Godfrey turned his attention to a type of technology that was mostly unknown outside a small community of radio enthusiasts. This technology was called WSPR, which stands for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. WSPR was developed in the 2000s and was designed for amateur radio operators. It allows thousands of hobbyists around the world to send out extremely weak radio signals every few minutes. These signals are very low power, often less than 1 watt, similar to the energy used by a small nightlight. Despite their weakness, they can travel enormous distances by bouncing off the ionosphere, sometimes covering thousands of miles. WSPR works through a global network of participants who send and receive these tiny signals. Each signal travels between 2 stations, and the results are automatically recorded. Most of the time, this system is used to help hobbyists understand how radio waves move through the atmosphere and how far their signals can reach. To most people, this information seems harmless and purely recreational. However, Godfrey noticed something important. If a large object, such as a commercial airplane, passed through one of these signal paths, it could disturb the signal in a measurable way. These disturbances are very small and easy to miss. They might appear as a slight drop in signal strength or a tiny shift in frequency. Sometimes the change is less than a single decibel. Even so, every one of these changes is logged and stored. All WSPR data is saved in an online database known as SPRNet. This database contains an enormous amount of information, including years of recorded signals and billions of individual entries created by radios across the globe. Godfrey realized that if MH370 had indeed flown across the Indian Ocean on the night it disappeared, it would have crossed many of these invisible radio signal paths. Each crossing could have left behind a disturbance. If those disturbances could be identified and arranged in order, they might reveal the aircraft's route, similar to a trail that marks where it had been. With this idea in mind, Godfrey committed himself fully to the task. This was not a short-term effort or a casual experiment. It became a long and demanding project that lasted for 3 years. He worked through the WSPRNet archive, which involved examining more than 200 billion lines of raw data. To manage this overwhelming amount of information, he had to create custom software. This software helped him filter out false signals caused by solar activity, background noise, and the natural instability of the ionosphere. Slowly and carefully, patterns began to appear. Godfrey focused on the night between March 7th and March 8th of 2014, the period during which the Boeing 777 disappeared. During this time window, he identified around 130 PR anomalies over the Indian Ocean. These anomalies did not behave like random noise and could not be explained by weather conditions or normal radio interference. When Godfrey plotted these anomalies on a map in the order they occurred, they formed a clear and continuous track. The path started at the location where Malaysian military radar had last detected the aircraft. From there, it curved toward the southwest and then turned south. This movement matched long-standing assumptions made by investigators, but it offered a much more precise outline of the plane's journey. The track did not gradually disappear or lose clarity. Instead, it ended at a very specific geographic point. That location was 29.128 degrees south and 99.934 degrees east. This spot lies roughly 1,500 kilometers west of Perth, Australia. The water in this area is deep, but the location sits about 200 kilometers inside a region that had never been explored by any official or private search operation. When data faced its toughest test in the search for MH370, numbers written on a page are only numbers. By themselves, they cannot lift a plane from the ocean floor. They cannot answer the questions families have carried for years. For Richard Godfrey, this was always the real challenge.
But all over the world, people have continued the hunt, including aerospace engineer Richard Godfrey.
Finding patterns inside ham radio signals was only the beginning. What truly mattered was whether those patterns could survive serious examination by experts who cared about evidence, not ideas. These were people who demanded proof that could stand up under pressure. Because of this, Godfrey brought his work to the University of Liverpool. He chose a team of analysts who already had experience solving complex aviation disasters. This was the same group that helped locate the wreckage of Air France Flight 447 after it disappeared in the Atlantic in 2011. These analysts were known for being direct and precise. If the data was weak or misleading, they would see it immediately. There would be no room for guesswork or dramatic claims. Godfrey presented them with his findings and allowed them to test every detail. The first step was a careful review of timing. He called this process a timestamp cross-check. The purpose was simple and strict. The radio disturbances found in the WSPR data had to match the real timeline of MH370. If the signals appeared long before or long after the plane's known contacts with the Inmarsat satellite, then the entire idea would fail. What emerged was the opposite of failure. Each of the 130 anomalies that Godfrey identified lined up closely with an Inmarsat ping. The gap was no more than about 4 minutes in each case. This level of agreement was far beyond chance. It showed a consistent relationship between the aircraft's known communication times and the radio signal disturbances. Investigators then searched for other possible causes. They examined whether another aircraft could have crossed the same airspace at those moments. They considered large cargo planes and other Boeing 777 aircraft. None matched the timing or position. The skies were empty of any other candidate that could explain the disturbances. With all alternatives removed, MH370 remained the only explanation that fit the evidence. The next phase focused on signal geometry. Inmarsat satellite data had always provided only broad guidance. It produced large arcs across the ocean, each one stretching hundreds of kilometers wide. These arcs were helpful for narrowing possibilities, but they could never offer precise locations. They were sketches rather than clear images. WSPR data changed that situation. Each radio signal traveled along a defined path between two operators. One operator might be in New Zealand, while another could be in South Africa. When an aircraft crossed that path, it disturbed the signal in a specific way. If several signal paths showed disturbances at the same time, those paths could be crossed like lines on a map. This method sharply reduced uncertainty. Instead of a massive search zone covering huge sections of ocean, Godfrey was able to identify narrow corridors. These corridors were only about 20 kilometers wide. As more signal paths were added, the trail became even more precise. Each additional path tightened the focus and strengthened the result. The most demanding test came next. This stage was known as the refraction fingerprint. The goal here was to prove that the disturbances were caused by a large aircraft and not by natural effects. Radio waves can bend and shift because of the ocean surface, the ionosphere, or solar activity. These natural influences can produce irregular patterns that look confusing. To separate real aircraft effects from background noise, Godfrey concentrated on signals in the 14 megahertz range. This frequency behaves in a predictable way when something as large as a Boeing 777 passes through it. He also applied strict filters in his software. Weak or unclear disturbances were removed. Only strong signals, around -25 decibels or better, were kept for analysis. After all filtering was complete, the result was still 130 strong anomalies. These signals did not appear randomly across the globe. Instead, they formed a clear cluster. Together, they traced a line across the southern Indian Ocean. The pattern looked deliberate and consistent, rather than scattered or accidental. The University of Liverpool team then applied their own methods to the data. They used Bayesian analysis, the same statistical approach that helped pinpoint the location of Air France 447. Their independent calculations led to a striking conclusion. There was a 74% probability that the wreckage of MH370 lay within a small area of ocean centered on Godfrey's coordinates. This result marked an important shift. For the first time since the aircraft vanished, the information was not just hopeful or speculative. It was supported by solid mathematics and tested by experienced analysts. While it did not provide absolute proof, it stood as the strongest data-driven lead since the night the plane disappeared. Objections to the WSPR theory were answered. Any bold new idea will always face resistance. The moment it is shared, questions and doubts appear. This is not a problem at all. In fact, this is exactly how science is meant to work. Real science grows through questioning, testing, and careful debate. When an idea is never challenged, that is when things become suspicious. With a mystery as painful and emotionally heavy as MH370, strong reactions were guaranteed. The skepticism came fast and loud. What matters most is how those doubts were answered. Step by step, the main objections to Richard Godfrey's WSPR theory were examined, tested, and pushed back with evidence. The first objection arrived almost immediately. Many people said WSPR was never designed to do this kind of work. This point is completely correct. WSPR, often called Whisper by radio hobbyists, was created for amateur radio users. Its purpose was to allow people to send very weak radio signals across long distances by bouncing them through the atmosphere. It was never meant to track aircraft or search for missing planes. That fact alone made many people dismiss the idea outright. However, science has a long history of tools being used in ways their creators never imagined. X-rays were discovered by accident during experiments with cathode rays in the late 1800s. Penicillin appeared when Alexander Fleming noticed mold-killing bacteria in 1928.
In 1928, Scottish medical researcher Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin. The discovery itself was accidental.
GPS, now used for daily navigation, began as a military system. The key point is not what a tool was designed for, but whether the science behind it is sound. In the case of WSPR, the physics is well understood. Radio waves bend, scatter, and change when large objects move through them. This has been studied for decades. Even Joe Taylor, the Nobel Prize winner who invented WSPR, confirmed that aircraft can disturb these signals. While he was careful about how precisely locations could be calculated, he agreed that the basic idea was valid. This moved the discussion beyond theory. Godfrey then went a step further by testing it in the real world. In November, his team worked with the University of Liverpool and chartered a Boeing 777. The plane flew along the same corridor over the Indian Ocean that matched the suspected MH370 route. At the same time, WSPR stations across the globe recorded data. The results were clear. Signal disturbances appeared exactly where the aircraft was flying. The timing matched closely, almost down to the minute. This showed the system worked in real conditions, not just on paper. The second objection focused on Godfrey himself. Critics said he kept moving the target. This also appeared true on the surface. Early calculations placed the crash site near 33 degrees south. Later, it shifted to 34 degrees south. Eventually, it moved to 29 degrees south. To some, this looked like guesswork, but this view misunderstands how scientific work develops. As more data becomes available, models improve. Early results are rarely perfect. Changes do not mean failure. They show learning. When Copernicus introduced the idea that Earth was not the center of the universe, his calculations were not exact. Later scientists refined them as better measurements became available. The same process happened here. Each shift in the proposed location came from more WSPR data and improved analysis methods. As time passed, the uncertainty became smaller. The most important detail is that for more than 14 months, the location has remained fixed at 29 degrees south. This stability matters. It shows the model has stopped drifting and reached a steady result. The third objection is the hardest to dismiss. No wreckage has been found at that exact location yet. This is a fair point. Until physical evidence is recovered from the ocean floor, uncertainty remains. But there is another way to approach this issue. Instead of starting with theory, start with the debris that has already been found. In 2015, a flaperon washed up on Réunion Island. This piece was confirmed beyond doubt to belong to MH370. Later, more debris appeared in Mozambique, Madagascar, and Tanzania. These were not random fragments. They were parts from a Boeing 777 connected directly to the missing aircraft. The question then became where they originated. This is where ocean science played a crucial role. Researchers at the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Germany ran large drift simulations. They released virtual trackers into computer models of Indian Ocean currents and observed where they would travel. This process was repeated hundreds of thousands of times. When the drift paths were traced backward from Réunion and the African coastlines, a clear pattern emerged. Most paths pointed back to an area within about 100 kilometers of the WSPR hotspot at 29 degrees south. This was not a broad or vague region. It was a specific zone, closely matching the WSPR results. This kind of independent agreement adds strong weight to the theory. When all objections are placed side by side, a pattern becomes clear. WSPR was not designed for this task, but its physics is proven and now tested in real conditions. The location changed over time, but only as data improved, and it has now remained stable. No wreckage has been found yet, but debris drift analysis points directly back to the same area. Each challenge led to stronger supporting evidence. What makes this moment different is that action is now underway. The harsh cyclone season in the southern Indian Ocean has ended, making operations possible again. Ocean Infinity has returned to the scene. This company led the major search effort in 2018 and has since improved its technology even further. Its main support ship, the Armada 7806, carries advanced Hugin autonomous underwater vehicles. These robotic submarines can dive 6,000 meters, operate without tethers for days, and scan the seabed with extremely detailed sonar. What do you think about the MH370? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Before you go, be sure to click on the video shown on your screen.